Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Hill. I'm the CEO of Girl Scouts of Oregon in Southwest Washington. And it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and also those of you who are new friends. So thank you all so much for coming today. I'm here to introduce our host for the next hour, Valerie Cleary. Val is on our board of directors, and she's also the chair of our Fund Development Committee. After leading the athletics department at Portland State University, Val recently took on the role of athletics director at the Multnomah Athletic Club. She was a Girl Scout in Northern California. Welcome, Valerie.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Karen, for the nice introduction. I am so excited to be here this afternoon, this evening almost, because we are going to hear from Girl Scout Katie Crafts, who's kite skied across Greenland. Like, who does that? I can't even imagine doing something so ambitious outdoors in the elements. Katie will talk about how Girl Scouts prepared her for this grand adventure. We'll also learn about what girls are learning today in our Girl Scouts outdoor program. Our expert in that area is Angie Madsen. We'll have time for questions and answers, so feel free to type those questions into the chat box throughout the time, and we'll get to those at the end of our session. Then I'll come back, let everyone know how we can all support this wonderful program and others like it. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome a longtime friend and of our guest of honor, plus a Girl Scout staff member, Angie Madsen. Angie graduated from Northeastern University with a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Science. After college, she moved to Washington and joined a small town ultimate Frisbee team. One day, a teammate she just had to meet, Katie Crafts, emailed all the female players to see if anyone wanted to climb to the snowy summit of Mount St. Helens that weekend, because everyone gets that text, right? Angie, having never even picked up an ice axe before, enthusiastically responded to the email. Since that first volcano summit shared together, the two continue to team up for alpine adventures. Angie is the outdoor program specialist for our council. She spent the past 4 years building up our program to offer girls outdoor learning opportunities along all the steps of the Girl Scout outdoor progression, from creating a windowsill garden to camping overnight in the snow. I'm sensing a theme here. Please help me welcome Angie Madsen.
Unmuted. Thank you, Valerie. When I was a 9-year-old Girl Scout, I would have never pictured myself standing on the top of an ice-covered volcano. It was just never presented as an opportunity to me. And there's all those societal and mental barriers that exist around outdoor activities and outdoor adventure. We're trying to break those down in Girl Scouts, by the way. But thankfully, a few years ago, I responded to that email from the woman on my Ultimate Frisbee team. And a few days later, I stood at the summit of Mount St. Helens. And I remember standing there looking out across Washington and Oregon thinking, our Girl Scouts need to know that they can do this too. Katie is not only an extraordinary friend, but she's also my adventure mentor. She showed me that women belong in mountaineering. She taught me the science and art of risk management in the outdoors. And she proves that with a mix of courage and progressive skill building, you can discover that you are far, far stronger than you may have thought. Katie exudes the Girl Scout mission as her courage, confidence, and character make the world a better place. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to the strong and inspiring Katie Crafts.
Thank you, Angie, so much. That was really sweet and endearing. Thanks, Angie, so much. That was really sweet and endearing to hear that. Can you nod your head if you can see my screen? You can? Great. Then I'm just going to switch this out so you don't have to read my notes with me and get this started. So yeah, Angie, that was so fun to think back to that time that we spent getting to know each other on the side of Mount St. Helens. And then thinking about all the mountains that you've climbed since then. And I feel like there are these times in our lives when progression leads to a breakthrough, whether it's in the outdoors or in business or what have you. And that breakthrough can be a new version of ourselves that we hadn't discovered before, or it can be doors that open that we never even knew existed, or it can be something else entirely. These breakthroughs don't happen overnight. It's always a progression of some sorts. And what happens is we allow ourselves to chase something that's pulling us out of our comfort zone, and it allows us to build ourselves bigger and develop us further than we'd had to develop ourselves before. So I was invited here today to share with you my story of progression and how it led to a transformational experience, kite skiing across Greenland. I'll tell you more about what exactly that means in a moment. I'll spend about 25 minutes sharing with you pictures and stories from the preparation and expedition itself, and we'll end with a few reflections from this experience. So let's start where most expeditions begin, looking at a map of where we're going. This is a picture of the Earth as you're probably used to seeing it, with the Arctic to the north and the Antarctic to the south and the equator in the middle. And this is a picture of the Earth as I've become accustomed to seeing it, with the Antarctic on the left side, so the northern hemisphere, and the Arctic on the left side, northern hemisphere, the Antarctic on the right side, the southern hemisphere. Well, these are both polar regions. There's a few key differences here. When I click here and the star shows up, this is where the North Pole is, and you'll see that it's over a body of water. This is the Arctic Ocean. And now where that star showed up, that's the South Pole, which is over a continent, the Antarctic continent. So the North Pole is over water, the South Pole is over land. There's also key differences in the animals in these parts of the planet. In the South, we have the penguins, and in the North, we have the polar bears. These two species don't interact anywhere outside of a Coca-Cola commercial. They're in different parts of the planet. But this was not how I always saw the world. In fact, just 10 years ago, I owned a home in town and was an employee for a small local company. But while I was living that life, I had this sense that I had more inside of me than I'd been able to leverage like that. And I had a deep curiosity to discover other ways to live and what exists in other parts of the world. And so, as we do sometimes, I sold my home, quit my job, and went to Antarctica. One thing led to another, and I ended up spending 5 amazing years living very large at the ends of the Earth, traveling between Antarctica in the winters, where I lectured about ice processes aboard the National Geographic Explorer, and then spending summers leading 10-day wilderness trips in Greenland. When I wasn't working, I was learning, whether it was learning how to fish or fly a small plane in Alaska, or how to tie knots for boats, or as Angie mentioned, climbing the mountains in my backyard. I spent many days hiking above tree line with my dog, and then sitting for hours reading a textbook about polar ice or ecology. During these years, I fell in love with the planet in a way I'd never been able to access before. First, it was with the penguins, charismatic as they are, and then with the polar bears, and then with the local people of Greenland, and on and on. But most of all, I was enchanted by the ice. I was enchanted by the way the icebergs had these lines from bubbles of prehistoric air that carved these ridges in them as they eroded into a new shape hour after hour. And I was enchanted by the way the bubbles sound when they pop and release air that once entombed the earth tens of thousands of years ago. That sound always left me wondering who else had breathed this air. Was this the air that the dinosaurs breathed? And I just completely fell in love with these crazy wild parts of the world where our norms of modern living mean nothing, and you can just be so humbled and present in the planet. And I knew that I had more to learn from the ice than what I could read in books or gather from the internet. Yet at the same time, and after so many years of nomadic living, I was also feeling the need to really ground myself back into my home, and felt my priorities shifting, and really wanting that home again, and wanting a job where I could sleep in my own bed at night. But before I could just leave the polar world behind, I wanted to celebrate how much I'd learned over those years and test myself in a way that I hadn't been able to yet. By this point, I'd read a lot about the original polar explorers, Shackleton, Nansen, Rasmussen, all men, and I'd wondered what they had in themselves to be what we now know as the original explorers. And if push came to shove, did I have what it would take to be one of those people? What separated me from them? And so it was with this mentality of writing my swan song to the polar world that I started to plan my own crossing of Greenland. This was a moment where I got a chance to prove myself to myself. And we get these sometimes, whether they appear before us with no warning, or other times we create them, these inflection points, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously, because we need them. So with that, let's go to Greenland and explore this progression of what it took to cross Greenland. I'll start with setting the groundwork, the ABCs of how we got it done. The first and best decision I made on this was choosing Celine to be my teammate. She and her husband live in Nunavut, which is the Canadian Arctic, where they have very limited resources. And so they quite literally build anything they need, whether it's clothing or their home, or for us, it was a polar bear alarm system for our expedition that they printed on their 3D printer. Celine and I met in Alaska on an expedition, and we realized that we shared a similar pitch of laughter, and we looked forward to a time when we'd be able to explore more of the planet together. As a quick side note, someone recently asked me how this expedition was impacted by way of us being two women. And then his girlfriend nudged him and said that you're not supposed to ask that. And we all laughed, but it really did raise the question of what happens when we acknowledge that men and women have different approaches and different strengths. Did it impact our trip that we were two women? Yes, and I am proud of that. It felt good to talk about it and not pretend like we were doing this trip man light or in a way that tried to mimic the men who'd come before us. No, we really leaned into being two women in every way, and it absolutely impacted our experience in really meaningful ways. One of the first things that we did was talk about it, as women do. We shared our personal and our team values that we wanted to bring into this experience, which ultimately made it our own unique experience. Many people crossed Greenland before us, and many people will cross Greenland after us. But I know that few will do it with as much laughter, chocolate, costumes, and in this style that we conducted to be our own by design. The next thing that we did after writing out our values was discuss the risks. And we did this by writing out all of the risks that we could think of, then ranking them based on the probability and the consequence. How likely was this to happen? What is the consequence if it does happen? We use this as our guide to prepare ourselves in our training and our gear. And I'm just going to pause here for a quick moment and give you my hack for running your own risk analysis in life. I think modern humans are pretty bad at analyzing risk and at separating the emotion of fear from the logic of risk. And that emotion is a very valid one, and we need to listen to it. But without being able to separate fear from risk, it's really hard to confront our fears and push through them. And this comes from a person who's very cautious and very fearful. So this is my risk analysis hack that I use for business or pleasure or what have you. I ask myself, what is the best case scenario? And what can I do that's within my control to make that happen? Then I ask myself, what's the worst case scenario? And what can I do that's within my control to prevent that from happening? And if the worst case scenario comes true, am I okay with that? And then lastly, what is the most realistic scenario? And what can I do to make it better? And by logically thinking myself through those thought processes, I usually figure out what I need to do next. The next thing that we did was plan a route. We chose a route that respected our abilities at the most realistic scenario. We weren't overly ambitious, yet we didn't downplay the risks involved. We thought we could likely do this route if we committed ourselves to this project for the next 2 years. And so that's what we did. We spent 2 years gathering our gear, getting our systems together, and getting ready for this expedition. 2 whole years. We built a website, solicited corporate donations, solicited personal donations, thanks to my mom and dad, who I know are on this meeting. We asked for friends to help us make our own gear when there wasn't a prototype that existed on the market. We learned the skills that we needed to have the ability to kite ski across Greenland. I was a novice kite skier myself and spent some time in Wyoming and Idaho learning how to get pulled in one direction long enough that I could feel confident hooking myself into sleds and keep going. Luckily, if you're crossing Greenland, you don't have to be good enough to know how to turn. You just have to go in one direction. So I learned just enough to be dangerous, but got to a point where I knew what I knew, and I also knew what my limitations were. In this picture, you can kind of see the kite system, how you're connected via harness to a kite that's a few meters long, and that's how we propelled ourselves across the island. So after 2 years of preparation and training and gear soliciting and all of the things, April 2018 came around and it was time to get started. So we started our expedition in Toronto with gear prep. And we gathered all our things. We spent a few days just consolidating everything that we brought together over the last couple of years, getting our medical kit ready and prepared, preparing 1,000 calorie breakfast baggies that were packed with Reese's Pieces and dried mangoes and sweet and savory, as however our stomachs would guide us. Getting our sleds rigged, we were each pulling 2 sleds side by side like this. Not in a row because side by side they wouldn't flip over because we were going fast. Also, we were using sleds to carry our emergency gear. And if a sled were to break, it would be a trip ender. And so we had a redundancy built into the sled by having 2 sleds for each of our sleds, 2 sleds deep, so that if one shell broke, there would be another in there. So we had some redundancies, which added to our safety. And then with all of our gear, we hit the road and it was time to get started. We flew from Toronto to Iceland and then Iceland to Greenland. Our first stopping point in Greenland was a small town of Kulusuk. This is the East Coast International Gateway to Greenland. And Kulusuk was a critical spot for us because we were lucky enough to get sponsored by Gruyere cheese. And cheese was our main source of protein on this expedition. And when we got the sponsorship, we asked them to ship it to the post office in Kulusuk, Greenland. And that's all we knew. And so we allocated 2 nights in Kulusuk to make sure that we found the cheese. And I'm happy to report that we found the cheese. This is a bit more of that town of Kulusuk. You can see the sea ice breaking up and there's dog sleds out here. From there, we took a helicopter to another coastal island. Most people in Greenland live on these coastal islands where there isn't any ice. So we were basically just island hopping to get us closer and closer to the mainland. Eventually, we arrived in Tasiilaq, this small town. This is where I had worked for a few summers each year previous and was a bit familiar with the location and the people and had some context. And when our helicopter landed, after 2 years of prep, planes, trains, and automobiles to get us to Tasiilaq, the helicopter landed, we got our gear out, loaded our sleds, and we're ready to go. But Greenland had a different thought for us. And the weather moved in and we couldn't fly in helicopter. When the clouds came and covered the ice, the helicopter pilot has to be able to see where the clouds end and the land begins. And in icy spaces, you really need a clear sky in order to make that safely. And when the clouds came in, there was no window of opportunity to land a helicopter on the ice. And sometimes these experiences humble our ambitions. And this was one of those times when the Greenland weather had different plans for us. And so we spent 10 days waiting. And I won't bore you with all the details, but just so you can start to feel our pain and boredom and agony, here's what we did. We played chess poorly. We played cribbage well. We ate seal meat from the locals that they gifted to us. We baked a cake that tasted like it had been in a cabinet in Greenland for 6 months. We pretended to ride the defunct chairlift. We learned that there are filters on our phones that let us spend hours taking goofy photos. We tried to hitchhike from a broken helicopter. We pondered the life decisions that had gotten us here. We made a list of things to do to add structure to our day, which included brushing our teeth. The best part of this time, though, is that we were staying at this hostel that was owned by Robert. And Robert himself had crossed Greenland 13 times. And he had such a wealth of wisdom from that time that he wasn't particularly forthcoming with his wisdom. But as the days passed into more days and more days, he started to eagerly kind of adopt us as his daughters and share his wisdom with us. And it was really, really special information. And then finally, it really was go time. And the helicopter pilot who we had been messaging on a daily basis all of those 10 days, I think he was just as happy to get rid of us as we were to land on the ice finally. So we were transported to the mainland, dropped off, and then the helicopter left. And then we had a moment to really live with our decisions that got us there. And then we spent the next 7 days kite skiing across Greenland. And I say kite ski bliss, but it was really mostly blissful. There were definitely some big challenging days. Luckily for all of you, the camera only came out on clear weather days, so you'll get to see the pretty photos. I'm excited to introduce you to Rosie. This is our tent Rosie. She was our home away from home, and Rosie was donated to us by some other friends who had done a kayak expedition around Antarctica. Rosie was not just a home, but she was a survival tool in case of inclement weather. One of the most likely risks that we identified was bad weather. Specifically, on the east coast of Greenland, there are strong glacially driven winds that pick up out of nowhere, and they're named pitteracks. And in East Greenland, that directly translates to the thing that reaches out to kill you. And these are winds that don't give a notice, and they've been known to kill people. And so we were prepared with instructions on how to identify them. We had gear with us, and we knew what to do if one of them picked up. Fortunately for us, we timed our window so that we didn't have any pitteracks. And during those 10 days, there were a couple small windows when we could have gone, but because of pitterack risk, we chose not to go. So again, we were being very cautious the whole time. Rosie had 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bedroom. The kitchen was the front vestibule, which had plenty of ventilation to protect against carbon monoxide poisoning, but we were always on hyper alert whenever a stove was on, so we didn't burn down our home, which also would have been a trip ender. At the end of each day, one of us would take the inside chores and the other would take the outside chores. Inside chores meant melting snow to make water, cooking dinner, tending to the stoves, fixing whatever had broken that day, and reporting back to our safety team back at home. Outside chores meant securing everything in case weather went wrong, securing the sleds, making sure our gear bags were zipped so that snow wouldn't get inside of them, securing the tent very thoroughly, and so on and so on. This is the bedroom. This was technically a 3-person tent, but when you're in minus 40-degree sleeping bags, it certainly felt like 2 people packed it out pretty well. Some things to note here are in the middle of our headspace here, you can see our bear alarm right here. We slept with that 3D printed bear fence around us because this was a part of the world where we could encounter polar bears. And we had rigged a system so that if a bear had entered that space, this alarm would go off. And it was our hope that it would startle the polar bear as much as it would startle us. We also had our InReach right next to us, which was our way of communicating on a daily basis with our home safety team. You can see my watch rigged to the middle guy line. We set our alarm every morning for 5 a.m. and every morning we checked the weather. And if it was good, which more often than not it was, we would go. Our sleep systems, we both slept inside of 2 sleeping bags. We had one down sleeping bag that was rated for negative 40 degrees, and that was inside of a synthetic sleeping bag that was rated for positive 40 degrees. We had to really protect our down gear because that was our safety. If we got cold, if we needed to be warmed, we needed down gear that was functional. And we knew that we would be cooking inside of our tent, and that had the risk of condensation. And if that condensation got our down gear wet, it would be rendered useless. And so we protected the integrity of our down sleeping bags with an outside shell that was synthetic. And then this is what our days looked like. It took us 2 hours in the morning to eat, go to the bathroom, that was no short feat, pack up our tent, pack up our gear, and get rigged. So this is me getting my kite ready. We would, once all of our gear was packed in, we would lay out our kite, which you could just barely see on the horizon here, set up the lines, which were 25-meter lines, rig up our skis, get our bodies in position. And remember, we both are connected to 150 pounds of sled weight behind us. So as soon as the kite launched and started to pull us forward, that anchor weight would pull us backwards. It took me the entire trip to get used to that pull, and sometimes it was very awkward. There was one day that I remember things started to click, and it was on our 3rd day. The first 2 days, every day was hard, but the first 2 days was a lot of learning for both of us, learning our systems, learning how to keep our toes warm or get them warm if they got cold, learning how to get feeling back in our hands when they've just been holding onto our kite bars for a couple hours, and so on and so on. And it felt uncomfortable. I am not used to spending 12 hours a day kite skiing across Greenland, and it was not a comfortable feeling. But on the 3rd day, our bodies started to get that muscle memory and get settled into that routine. And I remember at one point looking over at Celine on one of these beautiful days, and she had this grin that outspaced her face. And she yelled at me, "Katie, we are so badass." And I saw her in that moment. I zoomed away from, the tension in my forearms and the pitter patter that hadn't left my heart, and remembered to breathe, and just saw us as two women hundreds of miles from anybody else kiting across Greenland. It was one of few moments of sheer presence that I'll never forget. This is what the snow texture looked like. Unlike the groomed slopes at the ski resorts that we're all used to seeing and we love, we instead were greeted with what is called sastrugi. And sastrugi is that awkward texture of ice deposits when there's wind around. Sastrugi is, a few inches deep to a foot deep or sometimes more. So it was just a constant chatter for our knees and for the plastic sleds behind us. And I'll always remember the sound of the sleds behind us, just chattering, sometimes catching air and then chattering some more. And it made us tired. We started to get into a rhythm where we would kite for 1 hour, rest for 10 minutes, kite for 1 hour, rest for 10 minutes, and on and on and on, until literally at the end of the day, we couldn't walk. Our knees suddenly felt like we were decades too old to have made this decision. But the days were beautiful. Whenever it was clear skies, there was always a sundog, which was when there's a rainbow around the sun. This is caused by ice particles high up in the atmosphere, and it's quite common in the polar regions, but we don't get to see it unless we go to these places. I have to say it was not always clear and sunny like this. This is just when the camera was out. Some days there was no visibility at all. It's actually a thing called the ping pong ball effect, where the white of the clouds blend in with the white of the ground, and you can't tell where the land ends or the sky begins. Those days were disorienting. They were really hard to feel actual progress, but we had to trust our tools and our training. One of our training pieces that we'd learned was knowing when it was too unsafe to keep going, and instead pitch the tent, eat the chocolate, and wait out the weather. And it always did clear. So for 7 days, we had that as our routine. On the 8th day, we had bad weather. So we hunkered in the tent and once again ate cheese and chocolate and sang and laughed and wrote poems and just really enjoyed having a rest day after pushing our bodies and our minds so much for the last long time. Also, at this point, we had crossed about 95% of Greenland, and we had just about 64 kilometers left to go. And the days when we were moving quickly, we were easily covering over 100 kilometers each day. So on this day, when we went to bed, having just 64 kilometers ahead of us, we went to bed anticipating that we would be on land the next day. And we felt it in our bodies, and we felt it in our hearts and our minds, and we were eager and excited. But once again, Greenland had the final say, and Greenland had a different plan for us. So we went for a couple kilometers, but then the ice started to really crack open with rolling hills of ice, 5 to 20 feet tall, and crevasses that we had to avoid and navigate around, and meltwater ponds that we had to navigate around as well. We couldn't kite on this kind of terrain, so we put on our crampons and we walked. Each of us were still hauling sleds that were about just under 150 pounds each. And this is what the last 3 days were. We thought we would get out that day, and we had 3 really hard days before we would be off of the ice. This is where the hardest work began. These were the hardest days, but they were my favorites. I also just love that this was the last 3 days of not just an 11-day expedition, but a 2-year journey. And on that spectrum of start in 2016 to ending on dry land 3 days from now, we were 99.99999% there. But we were still on the ice, and there was more to do, and we couldn't just call it close enough. We actually had to finish. And so we did. The daytime sun would heat the ice and change it from hard ice that was easy to walk over into mushy meltwater ponds that soaked our boots and slowed us down. So because of that, we started each day at 1 a.m. so we would maximize our movement when the ice was frozen solid. We slept on bare glacial ice, securing our tent by using ice screws and often drying our wet boots, pants, and insoles underneath the evening sun. We were tired, but we were invigorated. This was hard work and our progress was slower than ever, but we kept going because it was all that we could do. As we got closer to land, the ice got more and more rugged, and eventually the steep hills started to become 20 to 30 feet tall. And we weren't strong enough physically to haul 150 pounds of weight in our sleds up and over these hills. When we would go up, they would pull us down. And then when we reached the top, they would slide down and we'd have to brace ourselves to not tumble down after them. So when this happened, we disconnected from our sleds and left one at a spot that we marked on our GPS and hauled just one sled, a quarter mile, half a mile forward, dropped it off, marked a waypoint on our GPS, then walked back to our other sled and brought it to our new starting point. And by leapfrogging like that, we tripled the distance that we had to cover, and 4 kilometers became 12 kilometers. But that was physically our only option. And eventually, by putting one foot in front of the other time and time again, we finally spotted dry land. And this is point 660, which we had been navigating to on our GPS the whole time. 660 just refers to the topographic line on the map because there's nothing here. So 660 was in our GPS. And I remember the day, the moment that we both summited the last ridge, not the last ridge to be had, but the ridge when we first saw land. And I can't even share with you how much happy rejoicing tears, I get emotional just now, just remembering it, but it was such a sweet moment of having worked so hard to get there. And then there it was, right there in front of us. On our last day, we moved for 24 hours, and this was the hardest terrain that led to crossing a glacial river. There was a river separating the ice from the land, and we had no option but to cross it. And then we hit the rundown rock debris, the moraine that we hauled our sleds over. And I can assure you that sleds travel better over ice than they do over ground up rock, but we had no other option than to keep going. And then we ended the day marching arm in arm, 2 of us tied to one sled because we were too fatigued to even haul one sled at a time. And arm in arm, we marched one sled, then went back for the next, and then brought the next one up and back to the next. And that's how we finally arrived to our destination. This is our last journal entry. It says, so nice to shower and sleep in a dry bed, feeling tired and fulfilled and proud of our efforts. Epic, we sent it. And again, I just can't help but feel that sense of emotion inside of me, even now, just sharing this with you and reliving that moment. We worked for 2 years to give ourselves the chance to test ourselves. And that moment of realizing that we had it in us, that we had passed the test that we set out for ourselves. It was hard-earned and it was incredible. Now, I'm going to zoom out here and reflect on this experience with you. There were some key ingredients that led to our ability to do this experience. The first was progression. I did not go from an office worker to a Greenland crosser overnight. This took many years of focused effort and intention, and it was a long and steady progression. The second key ingredient was mentorship. Celine and I were both really fortunate to have really strong mentors in our lives and people who had done this kind of thing before who were so gracious with their knowledge. We all build off of people who came before us, and we were fortunate to be able to stand upon the shoulders of giants on this trip. Another ingredient was support from others and belief. Oops, sorry about that. Belief in ourselves and from others. We had people who actually thought we could do this, and that mattered. We also had people who didn't think that we could do this, and that also mattered. But we also were surrounded by a supportive community. We had gear donated to us, we had food donated to us, we had skills contributed to our learning. The next ingredient was discovering our own style. Again, many men had done this trip before and many other people had done this trip before, but we needed to do it in our own way. Had we tried to do it in the way of somebody else, we would not have succeeded. I cannot cross Greenland the way that Shackleton crossed Antarctica. That's a non-starter. But I can cross Greenland the way that Celine and I chose to. And the last ingredient was reflection and introspection. And I'm speaking to you today, 2 years after having done this experience. And you can definitely believe I've considered this experience many times over in these days since. I think that reflection and introspection really needs to be part of any experience, outdoors or otherwise, whether it's group debriefs after impactful trips, or when things go wrong, talking about what went wrong and how to make it better. And I want to go just one layer deeper on that last point because it's so critical. The most important thing any of us can do when we have these breakthroughs in our progression is to learn from it. Take time to pause and introspect before going back to our busy lives. So here's what I do to introspect. I ask myself, how did I grow from this? In this case, I gained confidence in the outdoors, and now I truly believe I can do whatever I put my mind to. I asked myself, how would I do it differently next time? In this case, I missed out on a lot of big life things as I was getting ready for this expedition because it was such a big trip. And I had to ask myself if I'm okay with that trade-off. It turns out I'm not, and I don't want to do that again, but I was happy that I did it at that time. And lastly, I think it's critical to ask who helped me get here and to thank those people and pass it forward. For those of us who get the privilege of standing upon the shoulders of giants, it's our duty to be a giant for somebody else. So in closing, I am happy to share with you that I no longer feel that deep need to prove myself to myself, and that's perhaps the greatest gift that I took away from this experience. Other cultures around the world, including many Native cultures, have this kind of experience built into their transition from child to adult. And it builds adults who are comfortable with who we are, with who we've become. Yet we don't have that in our fast-paced modern culture. And without it, it leads to building adults who are left wondering, am I someone who's capable of more? Or even worse, it leaves us accepting our insecurities, that I'm just not someone who's capable of more. And so I'll just play less or act less because I haven't proven myself to myself. And because of that, I deeply believe in programs and people who support the opportunity for us to create better, more whole versions of ourselves so we can shape a better world. And I just want to end with this quote from Mark Twain that I really like. 20 years from now, you'll regret more the things you didn't do than the ones that you did. So cast off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you, Angie, I think.
Actually, I will hop in and I will first and foremost say, wow, that was absolutely amazing. And Katie, as I sit here and I look at the young girls, the Girl Scouts that we have on this call today, and think at one point that was you. And from all of your life lessons, so whether it's, who do I see on my screen right now? I see a Sophie, I see a Hannah. They can be the next Katie. They will be the next Katie embarking on whatever their adventure is. So absolutely amazing. And I could sit here and listen to your story and all the details about it over and over again. I have one question for you though. You had talked a little bit about, the shoulders that you stand on. Who or what inspired you to take on this adventure?
Who or what inspired me to take on this adventure? I inspired myself. I think I wanted to do this and I was curious if I could, so I set out to see if I can. Nobody nudged me to do it and nobody said, this is something you're capable of. And I think that's something we have to find intrinsic motivation for often. However, I also stood upon the shoulders of many, many giants to make it happen and come to fruition. And for me, these were people, there was one woman one year in Antarctica, I was sharing a cabin with this woman, Sunny. And Sunny was one of the first women, she was on the first all-female team to ski to the South Pole in the 70s. And it just so happened that the winter before my trip across Greenland, I was rooming with Sunny. And it was people like Sunny who paved the way in the world for someone like me to kite across Greenland. I'm so happy to share that we were well supported with donations and with sponsorships. And we never had anybody tell us that we couldn't do this or they didn't want to support us because we were women. There have been so many women who came before us and who did these things that shifted how the world sees what women are capable of. And they didn't get sponsorships. There's a great film I watched as I was preparing for this called Maiden. And it's about the first all-women sailing voyage around the world in, I think, the 70s also. And those women, they fought for sponsorship. They worked harder than we did for sponsorship, and they didn't get it because the world wasn't ready to see what they could do. And they were told that it was too dangerous for them. And because they didn't get sponsorship, I got sponsorship. Because these women have fought for things in the past and past generations, I was able to do this. And then standing just further upon the shoulder of giants, it included, I had a dog sitter at home watching my dog. My parents personally wrote a check to help make this happen. I mean, there was a world of a community standing underneath us, pushing us forward, believing in us and helping us make this happen.
Well, that is fantastic. So everyone, we're going to move on, but if you know how to use your little emojis, let's give Katie a big round of applause. Nicely done, Katie. That was just absolutely amazing. So I got to ask my question. So please put your questions into the chat so we could ask Katie more questions to learn more about her adventure as the evening goes on. But right now we're going to hear again from Angie, and she is going to tell us all about our amazing Girl Scout outdoor programs, and will let us know what the girls are learning right now. So Angie, over to you.
Thank you. Can you give me a thumbs up, Valerie, if you can see my screen, my slide? Can anyone see my slide? Thumbs up. Yep. Okay, great. So I'll try and keep it quick because Katie's story sounds way more cool than anything I could share of my own. But the good news is we do really incredible things at our Girl Scouts outdoor program. And these programs that we offer in our council are the stepping stones that Katie was talking about to eventually get up to doing whatever your big adventure dream is, such as kite skiing across Greenland. So Girl Scouts get to choose their own adventure as they build on their skills. And we use that Girl Scout leadership experience so that it's girl-led, there's cooperative learning, and we provide learning by doing opportunities. We base all of our outdoor programs, if I can, here it goes. We base our outdoor programming off of progression, like Katie has alluded to. And at each step of Girl Scout outdoor programming, girls will build upon their competence, their confidence, their outdoor interest, and even environmental stewardship. For example, you can't go climb to the summit of Mount Denali before hiking your local mountain. And you can't do that before looking outside or going for a stroll down the sidewalk. So if we fill in this progression chart with examples of what we offer at our Girl Scouts Council, you see something like this. We have Girl Scouts who are just looking out their window, thinking about the tree in their yard. And then we have girls who move to hiking outside. They start camping outside. And someday, if they stick with Girl Scouting, they will move into that final pillar, adventure out. They might kite ski across Greenland, whatever
The thing is doubled down here. The bar is like doubled.
If you can mute yourself, that would be amazing. Thank you. So yeah, we are thrilled to offer these programs, but we are even more excited to think about what our resources and opportunities in the future are. So I just want to give you a very quick glimpse into the world of outdoor programming at Girl Scouts. A lot of the entry level outdoor experiences for our members are day hikes. We have staff-led hikes. We have here pictures of Dog Mountain, Wind Mountain, Tamanoas Falls. These are a great avenue for Girl Scouts to explore using the 10 essentials, practicing their leave no trace principles. And then when they're ready to go camping as a troop or as with their family, they can enjoy a weekend at our properties. So they might start off by camping in cabins, maybe move to a tent, move to sleeping under the stars. And we also offer opportunities in these programs to have older Girl Scouts teach and lead younger Girl Scouts. I love the picture on the left. This group of girls decided that they wanted to get the invasive tadpoles out of this little pond, and she thought it would be fun to put it on her head. So you never really know what your own adventure will be. We also have amazing volunteer-led programs. Junior Tent Camp, Tamboo is an outdoor skills competition. Girls in the Woods is our annual backpacking trip with the Willamette National Forest. You can see in this picture, they are learning how to backpack on the Pacific Crest Trail. We also lean on our community partners for anything that staff and volunteers aren't able to lead at the moment. So things like snowshoeing, boating, going to Mount St. Helens. There are tons of opportunities that change seasonally in our council. Even the government gets involved. We have our state parks weekend every year that is family friendly and a great entry way for Girl Scouts to start looking outdoors. For extra learning and adventure outside of scheduled events, Girl Scouts can do some on your own programming. We have a handful of outdoor focused patch programs at our council. The newest one, I believe, is the Our Volcano Neighbors patch program, which we worked with community partners to make an entire packet all about learning the geography and geology of the volcanoes in our council, and a heavy focus on the history and culture of Mount St. Helens. There's the Girl Scouts Run the World patch program to help Girl Scouts train towards an endurance goal. The Outdoor Career Exploration patch program helps older Girl Scouts consider different careers related to the outdoors. We try to have something for everybody and inch their way forward on progression. But of course, we still have a lot to do since nonprofit resources can be slim, especially during COVID. And we're hoping to expand our offerings and our reach so that all our Girl Scouts have the opportunity to realize their dream outdoor adventure, whether that's kite skiing across Greenland or whatever their brains come up with. So in the future, we really hope to expand our snow camping programs. This is actually one that Katie Crafts had helped us run the first time. Katie and I are both in a couple of these photos actually. But this was the Girl Scouts' first time camping on snow, and the feedback was magical. It's very inspiring to see the wonder in their eyes and know that it will probably never go away. We also hope to offer more backpacking opportunities for both youth and the adult volunteers. We hear you. There are plenty of adults who want more experience that they didn't have when they were Girl Scouts as youth. And of course, we're hoping to expand some existing resources that we haven't completely come to realize yet, like the new Trailblazers and Mariners relaunch. These are old historic types of Girl Scout troops focused on hiking and adventure sports or boating if you're a mariner. We have requests for trail running, emergency preparedness, more wilderness first aid classes, which we have started to offer for youth. And of course, winter activities on snow and ice. Our wish list continues. We have had requests for an outdoor gear rental or lending program, more requests for high adventure activities like rock climbing, perhaps kite skiing someday, outdoor skills certifications. We currently have the capacity to certify girls in first aid, CPR, and wilderness first aid, but we're hoping for more. And also just having more free resources to give our members, like this hike selection guide. It gives members the ability to assess their own hiking ability and suggest hikes in the region for them. So that is your crash course in our council's outdoor program. Again, we are hoping to come up with more and more as the years go on, but we've come a long way. And there's a nice picture of Katie and I covered in zinc on our faces on Mount St. Helens, actually. Thank you. I'll send it back to you, Valerie.
That is just amazing. So thank you, Angie. It sounds like the girls have so many options to get outdoors today in Girl Scouting, and it goes way beyond camp. And I just think that's so cool, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. Girl Scouts is near and dear to my heart because it showcases the resilience and strength of girls and women, much like Katie. So cool. In fact, all of Girl Scouting prepares girls to empower themselves so they can be effective leaders like Katie and Angie as they summit Mount St. Helens. And today we have a unique opportunity to support this program and the many others at Girl Scouts of Oregon and Southwest Washington. This is the second event for a new giving circle called the Evergreen Society. This isn't like other giving circles because there's no minimum giving requirement. We know that every gift is important, much like those donations Katie received for her trip. So every person who gives at any level or volunteers or connects us to other people can be a member. We hope to have another event in February and another in May. The reason for this club that everyone can join is so that everyone can stay connected to this amazing organization that builds phenomenal girl leaders. You can designate your gift of any amount for outdoor program, like the one that inspired Katie, or for any other program. Every gift of any amount is important, and every dollar means that girls will develop the skills to become effective leaders, whatever they put their minds to. It's especially important to support Girl Scouts now after a very tough year from COVID. And I saw in the chat, all these Girl Scouts are anxious to get out there and start doing these things. So we want to be able to provide them with those activities. Girls really suffered from being isolated and away from their friends and activities. Their mental health took a toll. Now they're all looking forward to overnight camp and troop meetings and just getting back to the new normal. And in Girl Scouts outdoor programming, girls can gain confidence and competence in the outdoors. They're able to build interest in their environment and learn environmental stewardship, even putting tadpoles on their heads. You can use the link in the chat to give your gift of any size. Your $25 gift could pay for a girl's entire year of membership, $25. Your $100 gift could provide activity boxes for girls, no internet needed. Your $250 gift can help a girl experience overnight camp. And let me tell you, there is nothing better than overnight camp. And if you'd rather give monthly, you can do that too. And the first 10 $100 gifts will be matched by our phenomenal board member, Jane Drew. So thank you, Jane. So let's spend Jane's money. Let's get 10 $100 gifts. I feel so strongly about girl leadership that I'm already a member of the Evergreen Society. So who wants to join me? Just click in the link in the chat box to give your gift. So I'm going to actually look to see, and Tiffany, you might be able to look to see as the gifts come in. Just super, super thankful. Harmony, thank you so much for that $250 gift. That's so awesome. And of course, like we said, to Jane for matching, because these young women on this call, I mean, look like they are ready for an adventure. Girls, are you ready for an adventure? I could see it in your face that you are ready to go. So while you're giving, and thank you so much for supporting Girl Scouts. For over 100 years, girls have discovered, explored, and strengthened their outdoor skills and commitment to the environmental stewardship through Girl Scouting. Guided by supportive adults and peers, Girl Scouts discover the wonders of nature, experience the thrill of adventure, and challenge themselves and each other to reach new heights. Girl Scout Camp helps girls develop important life skills and positive characteristics. As you would expect, girls who attend Girl Scout Camp learn to appreciate nature and become environmental stewards. Girl Scout Camp provides additional benefits, helping campers build important socio-emotional and leadership skills that they need to become successful adults. The majority of Girl Scout Camp alums say their camp experience was central to their development of their sense of self, positive values, challenge-seeking skills, healthy relationships, and leadership skills, all of which we just heard Katie talk about in her adventure in Greenland. The most significant differences between Girl Scouts and non-Girl Scout Camp alums: the development of a strong sense of self and leadership skills, essential components of Girl Scout programming. Founded in 1912, Girl Scouts is the preeminent leadership development organization for girls with over 2.5 million members, more than 1.7 million girls, and 750,000 adults. Girl Scouts is the leading authority on girls' healthy development and builds girls of courage, confidence, and character who make the world a better place. Kellyanne, do we have any questions in the chat yet?
We do. We've got, yes, a few questions for
All
both
right.
Katie
Well,
and Angie.
Before we start with those questions, I have one more question. How many of us, and if you have your cameras off, you might need to turn them on now. How many on this call were Girl Scouts? Just raise your hand so we could see all the Girl Scouts alums. Just give it a big wave. Current Girl Scouts, past Girl Scouts. Look at that. Rocket ladies. I love it. I love it. That is awesome. Well, that is great. So I want to start with Kellyanne. Do you want to just ask the questions out loud, or would you like me to read them? Either way.
Let's see. I'll go ahead and read them. Yeah. So this is a
All right, great. So
question.
Katie, you're back on.
Okay, I'm here and present.
So this is a question for Katie from Sophie about how big was Rosie?
Rosie was a big girl. She was about 8 feet wide and 15 feet long. And that was plenty of space for us. She was a 3-person tent, and we were happy to have a 3-person tent for 2 of us and all of our gear.
Next one is also for you from Eden. Did you see any animals?
We did see some animals. We were lucky to not see a polar bear in person. We were also lucky to see polar bear tracks when we were in the helicopter and getting dropped off. And we were also lucky that the helicopter pilot traveled along those tracks just to make sure that the polar bear was not very present. So that was the only remote experience we've had that had anything to do with polar bears. We saw 2 birds, small birds in the middle of Greenland, which was always peculiar to us. I wondered if it was the same one that had followed us for a few days and what it was eating and what it was doing there. We saw at the coastline, we knew that we were near the coastline because we saw some geese flying in a V formation. And we hadn't yet seen the coast. We hadn't yet seen the hills. We knew by our GPS that we were getting close, but all we saw first was some geese in the distance. And it was our sign that we were nearing life. Well, it wasn't wildlife. One day, about day 6, I think it must have been, as we just saw some tents appear in the distance. And we were still plenty far away from the coastline, and we saw them approach, or we started to get closer and closer. They happened to be right on our trail or right on our route that we had chosen. And as we approached, it turned out it was a NSF, National Science Foundation research station. And they had just skied out or snowmobiled out the day before and were setting up their remote science camp. And it happened to be perfect timing because that morning we had a near crisis moment when we ran out of hot cocoa. And when we entered the camp, it was a very funny moment where Celine and I, we came out of the horizon, and by the time we got there, the whole research station was outside and wondering who was coming out of the horizon. And it was 2 women who pulled off our gear and were just ready to have some cocoa and hang out with some people. And they were very gracious to us. They were giants that we met on the ice sheet, and they gave us a baggie of hot cocoa to go.
Nice. Let's see. This one is from Sophie. When did you start Girl Scouts? What level were you at?
I was in Girl Scouts when I was in elementary school, and I was a brownie. Is that still a thing? And I sold cookies was one of my memories. And I remember being indoors in classrooms. In my youth, I was not very outdoorsy, you might be surprised to hear. I was more into art and music and that kind of thing. And so my memories around Girl Scouts were indoors and more around people than places.
Next one is a question for Angie around our outdoor programs. Folks are really excited about them. So Shade and Sophie were wondering, are the outdoor programs open now, or when will activities open?
So these days we're releasing our program guide on a quarterly basis. There is the fall program guide out right now that is covering all of our activities for October, November, and December. And the link was just put in the chat, so you can click that and see what we have going on. And within the next couple of months, you will see the winter program guide. Sneak peek, there will be some snowshoeing, so stay tuned for that.
The next one is also for Angie, and I think the link was also, or a link was also put in the chat around what are we doing to keep these centers safe for staff and Girl Scouts due to COVID-19?
So all of our COVID policies are on our website. You can find a link in the chat, or if you go to girlscoutsosw.org, there is a little button for Girl Scouts Together, and that tells you all the guidance as it changes for our COVID policies.
Good stuff. Well, I think we are at our time. Thank you all so much for coming to this amazing event. And Katie, just so inspirational. I myself have never been an outdoorsy person, but you have definitely inspired me. And now that I hear about snowshoeing, I've always wanted to try that. So maybe there's some girls on this call that want to give me some good Girl Scout encouragement to try some snowshoeing this winter. But thank you all so much for coming out this evening. We're going to make sure we're going to send the folks that are on this call that register, we'll send you a link to the recording of it. So if you want to watch it again and learn more about Katie's adventure, or if you even think about another question, be sure to send that in and we'll try to get that answer for you. So in closing, we just ask all of you just to stay healthy and enjoy the rest of your evening and keep being amazing, girls. Keep being amazing. And thank you all so much for coming. Have a nice night. And thank you, Katie.